Welcome back to Quick Hits, the podcast where we explore the latest trends and innovations in healthcare technology. I'm your host, Ken Booth, joined as always by Tyler Smith. Today, we're diving into a crucial topic: medical technology management and cost savings in healthcare, with a guest who brings decades of expertise to the table. We're thrilled to welcome Ramana Sastry, the Executive Director of Clinical Technologies at UCSF Health. Ramana has spent over 17 years at UCSF, leading initiatives that optimize medical device maintenance, reduce costs, and enhance patient care. His journey from biomedical technician to industry leader offers a unique perspective on how hospitals can strike the delicate balance between technology investments, operational efficiency, and clinical effectiveness. In this episode, Ramana breaks down how health systems can leverage smarter technology strategies, automation, and AI-driven insights to improve equipment uptime while keeping costs in check, all without compromising patient care. We also explore the growing intersection of medical devices and IT systems, and how healthcare organizations can navigate the challenges of an increasingly connected world. This is a must listen for hospital administrators, clinical engineers, and anyone interested in the future of healthcare technology. Don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform and enjoy this episode of Quick Hits. And welcome to another episode of Quick Hits. I'm your host, Ken Booth, joined as always by my co-host, Tyler Smith. Tyler, how are you today?
Ever thrilled to be here, Ken.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. We are joined this week by the Executive Director of Clinical Technologies at UCSF Health, Ramana Sastry. Ramana, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be on. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've enjoyed working with UCSF in the past, and really excited to have you on the show. I thought before we dive into our topics today, though, if we could just kind of help the listeners understand a little bit about yourself. What's your background? How did you get to where you are today?
It's a bit of in a roundabout way and a bit of through a back door, but I essentially started off my academic career as in biology and biochemistry, where I worked in research departments doing my undergrad, and then somehow transferred over into the technology side and started off in a job where I was actually a technician. I started off as a biomed technician 1 and progressed all the way to a biomed technician 4, and eventually got into management as a manager of a biomedical engineering department at a local hospital, at a smaller hospital, community hospital in upstate New York. And then eventually became, a director at a major facility in Boston. And I also spent some time at LSU Medical Center in Shreveport, Louisiana, before coming out to California, where I started. It was 17 years at UCSF right now.
Wow.
Certainly, you're familiar with the topics that we're going to discuss today, then the first being medical technology management. But we really wanted to talk about cost savings, certainly something that is a national issue, right? Is just the rising cost of everything, especially healthcare. From your perspective, how can proper medical technology management really help reduce those costs? But at the same time, we don't want to see that reduction in patient care. How do we improve patient care, or at least maintain it at its current level?
That's a fine line to walk, and I like the way you phrased it, where by saying how we can help reduce the cost through better technology management, because healthcare technology or medical device technology management is, compared to all the overall cost structure of a health system, tends to be relatively small. However, the impact can be tremendous. Much bigger than the size of our program, our clinical engineering or clinical technologies programs overall. The idea is that people tend to the first way to optimize, to help with the cost, is to optimize the true cost of ownership of the technology used in the delivery of healthcare. And that starts off with getting the correct features and involving the clinicians to get the right set of features involved in the purchase of equipment, and then negotiating the price of the purchase. But more importantly, after that after the system comes in, to develop the appropriate maintenance strategies. Uh, People tend to figure that it's going to be simply as getting the lowest cost solution to continue to maintain it. That necessarily does not provide you with the best options for the life of that technology. And so, what we need to consider in the appropriate maintenance strategies is the scheduled maintenance and the unscheduled maintenance, and then also what Department of CMS had provided a number of years ago, which is the AEM program. In other words, we can go away from the manufacturer mandated maintenance strategies as long as it's based upon data that we have collected over a period of time. So it's essentially developing a maintenance strategy that's going to provide the end user the clinical options and the clinical workflows that they need, while at the same time doing it in a way that's going to be as cost effective as possible.
And when you say developing like these maintenance schedules or maintenance programs, there's no like, is there a standard that everyone follows, or does it need to change depending on the health system?
Well, it starts off with it's mandated by the regulatory agencies that we start off with what is given in the OEM's service manuals.
Okay.
So if the OEM says that this a specific technology needs to be inspected every year or every 6 months, et cetera, and they provide you with a detailed list of tasks that we have to perform, that's mandated. We have to start off with that, and then we can then, based upon data that we've accumulated over time, we can modify those maintenance strategies, either changing the PM procedure, the procedures, or changing the frequency of inspections, either greater frequency or lesser frequency.
So then you guys do quite a bit of strategizing between your in-house maintenance strategy and the original OEM suggested strategy. So have you found a lot of situations where you have to be a little bit more aggressive because of just how equipment is used?
Yes, there's a couple of instances in our case where we did increase the frequency of the preventative maintenance inspections, primarily coming up from data that we've acquired in terms of failure rates. We look at the service histories and see that the failure rates are a little bit are a little higher than when we expected, and then what we noticed was that we changed the PM frequency, made it more frequent, and then and then that's when we saw that in those cases that the failure rates did actually come down a little bit.
It's a really interesting data point, because I think my initial guess was going to be, oh, the way you generate cost savings is you do less maintenance, because that's less engineering or tech hours. But it sounds like if the failure rates are decreased by better, more optimized maintenance, which may be some more, that actually could lead to cost. Or am I misinterpreting your data?
No, yeah, you actually phrased it very well, because at the end of the day, it all comes down to our maintenance strategies. All come down to availability of the systems for patient care. And when our systems are not available for patient care, that can be translated to loss of revenue, because you're not going to be able to see that patient or at that time, and so therefore that's considered loss of revenue. So uptime calculations are important, but uptime calculations in and itself is not the ideal, because there are so many there's so many variables associated with the calculation of uptime. But it's essentially the availability of the systems to the clinicians when they need it for their patient care, and a maintenance strategy that can optimize that will help overall, not necessarily optimize the cost of maintenance technologies, because we're not going to be able to just simply reduce maintenance costs by either going to a contract or bringing it in house. It's got to be optimized to ensure that the devices are available for use during normal business hours of a healthcare system.
So that kind of leads to a question that we've been talking about, and that's the role staff training plays in optimizing in-house maintenance strategies. So how should health systems invest in their technical teams to ensure long-term success?
I think, and that's always a challenge, because a lot of healthcare facilities take a look at training, especially for clinical technologies, because they look at it as a cost, and they don't really necessarily see it as a way to justify the cost by saying that it's going to increase the availability of the systems. At the end of the day, a
Mm,
well-trained staff in-house is your best option because they're on site, so response times are very low. And whereas if you have an OEM contract and you're waiting for the OEM to come in, then that creates a problem because there's going to be lost time over there. And time in this case is money because you're
right.
losing the revenue of for regarding patient care. But the other thing is that people tend to also look at that from the perspective of um, OEMs. It should not be either or. We as clinical technologies in an in-house program rely heavily on the OEMs as well. So that that I guess that balance needs to be hit with with in-house training, in-house staff, as well as the OEMs. There are certain modalities that we have to maintain a contractual relationship with the OEMs for service, even though we have the appropriate staff, well-trained staff. And examples of those are the more complex CTs and MR systems that we have, where we cannot live without the OEMs either. But one
Mm,
of the things that we tell the OEMs is that we are your best marketing tool. Having a well-trained in-house staff is essentially the best marketing tool that you can have because we can really help minimize the downtime systems because we are there, and especially if we are well trained, we can troubleshoot in conjunction with the OEMs to get the systems back up and ready sooner than later. So, in a sense, we do have to maintain relationships with the OEMs, but at the same time, we can be the best possible marketing tool for the OEMs because there's a lot of talk recently about whether OEMs whether it should go, it's one way or the other, and OEMs are trying to fight back in terms of getting that revenue stream potentially lost in certain people's minds about when a program goes in house. I don't see that at all. I see that as our ability to get the systems up and running, and having downtime be completely opaque to the clinical users is going to be the best marketing tool for that system. If a vendor comes in and the clinicians have a really good experience with that technology, not because it doesn't fail very often, but it's maintained really well. And any kind of maintenance, whether it be scheduled or corrective maintenance, is really off the books from the perspective of the clinicians. That's when it becomes a really good partnership. And OEMs should really rely on our expertise as well as theirs. There are certain systems we have that I think that we are as, if not better, in certain sense, we are, we know these systems a lot better than the OEMs because we live and
mm.
breathe it every day. And they take advantage of us too, as well, in that from that perspective. So I think it's going to be not necessarily completely in-house or completely OEM, but it's going to be somewhere in between where we develop a relationship with each OEM, depending upon what it is. There are some things that do not require any kind of contractual relationship. And those are the things that are less complex, but the more complex systems, especially systems that sit on on our hospital IT network, we definitely need to be able to maintain a good relationship with the OEM moving forward.
Sure. And when you're talking about OEMs, that just leads me to believe, and we know that there's a lot of OEMs you're working with. And so inventory management for a medical equipment management program must be extremely time consuming. So I'm wondering how automation can help streamline the processes, and maybe what are some best practices you've seen in action for a medical equipment management program.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's a great point. It is time consuming, but it's also takes a tremendous amount of cost to maintain that. It's very manual to a large extent right now. Automation, for example, when you say you want to maintain an accurate inventory, it isn't just that you have that device listed in your inventories. Say now you have 10 widgets. It isn't just enough that you have 10 widgets in your inventory. Regulatory mandates require us to maintain, number one, a risk-based inventory. So therefore, we have to have a risk-based equipment classification. And associated with those risk classifications are the preventative maintenance procedures, for example. And all of those have to be assigned manually right now. So when a device comes in, we look at it, it's the manufacturer, the model, and then we have to then look at it and see how it is that, if we have other systems similar to that, which case it gets classified by that. And the automation that we have done is that if a device gets classified, it automatically inherits a specific PM frequency, preventative maintenance frequency, and a specific preventative maintenance procedure. But then we want to be able to take that automation a step further, because if you look at a system of health systems, for example, if all of them are doing it the same way, in other words, if we can come up with an algorithm to automate that, so that we can say that if any system comes in, we basically have a centralized database somewhere in this country. In other words, I'm asking that we standardize equipment classifications, equipment preventative maintenance procedures, and then if we do that, that would save us a tremendous amount of labor resources, in maintaining an inventory. But more importantly, when you're looking at service histories to develop better maintenance strategies, then we can be comparing apples to apples, as opposed to then spending a lot of time saying, okay, this is called X in this system, but it's called Y in this other system. And that itself is going to take a long time for us to make that determination. And then we have to compare those apples and oranges and come up with better strategies for maintenance. But if we can automate a lot of that, so that a device comes in, we use a national database somehow, where we can actually look at it from the perspective of, these are the it's called the same thing in every across the country. That opens us up to a tremendous amount of data that we can actually look at, as opposed to looking at more smaller data subsets. If we have a national database where we can actually call everything the same thing, develop the preventative maintenance procedures across the board for those devices, that provides us with a much broader data set for us to look at and to develop better maintenance strategies moving forward.
So you're talking developing a national standard, really, that everyone kind of agrees upon, and that would include getting the feedback of the OEM, right? I mean, they would have to agree to this national standard, because if you and several other hospital systems come up with this standard, how do you work with these OEMs to get them to understand, look, this helps everyone. This speeds up deployment. This speeds up maintenance. Like, what's the process there?
Well, see, a certain portion of it would be involved with the OEMs, but this is more on the maintenance side, at the hospital side.
I see.
What I noticed a lot of times is, in the past, for example, when we hired engineers that originally started their careers as an OEM engineer, the standards and the requirements that are specific to healthcare institutions are slightly different from the standards and the mandates for the OEMs. For example, documentation standards are way different for OEMs, field service engineers, as opposed to in-house engineers that have to maintain the systems in-house. Mm-hmm. So it's a question of having them understand that, we want to be able to call a widget across the board, but more importantly, the risk classification system that goes on by that doesn't necessarily have to be reviewed with the OEMs. It'd be nice if they're on board with it, but the equipment classifications, the risk and the risk scores that we assign to those systems to develop and maintain a risk-based inventory is not in the purview of the OEMs, because the OEMs do not deal with a very broad inventory of systems, whereas in-house programs do. We maintain everything from basic oral thermometers to CTs and MRs. So therefore, we have to have a very broad risk classification system. If we take a risk classification system of a device or technology to the OEM, they may or may not really understand what that risk classification system is from the broad spectrum of the full larger inventory that we have to make.
If you're enjoying this episode of Quick Hits so far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Now back to the episode.
So, Ramana, what's really cool about talking with you today is while a lot of the work we do, it always affects the patient and the providers, but the interfaces tend to be on the computer screen or the iPhone screen or what have you, the tablet. Yet your interface with the patient and the provider is pretty physical. So, while we're talking about all these maintenance components, that has to do with the real effect a device can have or technology can have immediately on a patient's life. So we'll love to hear even the next step on all the work that you all do and how that really affects the patient's lives. And it may seem very obvious to you, but for our listeners, I think it'd be really helpful.
Essentially, what one of the things that we sort of try to do is not to bring in technologies in and then have our clinicians uh, you know develop clinical workflows around the technology. We try to do it the other way. We try to select and then technologies and then configure them so that it's very little disruption to clinical workflows or changes to clinical workflows. Changes to clinical workflows has a tremendous impact not only on patient care but on the cost structure as well. So therefore, it isn't just bringing in the technologies in, but we bring in the technologies and having to configure them so that it meets our clinical workflows as best as possible with minimal disruptions or changes to our clinical workflows.
Maybe it actually kind of leads to another question, and that's like the definition of medical device is evolving to include IT networks and data transfer systems. So, how does this shift impact service delivery and support strategies?
Yeah. So over the years, before when I first started out as a technician or as an engineer, medical devices for the most part were standalone devices, and so therefore our responsibilities really ended when you plug in the device into the wall for power. And anything beyond that is not our concern. That would be either for power, it would be facilities, but none of these systems were networked together. So we had a very clear mandate and a very clear boundaries on what we were responsible for. But now, as medical devices now sit on the hospital network, and the definition the FDA has regarding medical devices is not only the definition of the medical device itself, but the network that it sits on, but also the bidirectional data flow. And that also has to be considered when we're developing maintenance strategies, because it isn't just enough that the medical device is working, but if that medical device is not transferring or transmitting data to a variety of different IT systems, like such as EMR, for example, then the medical device may not be available for patient care, because if the transfer of data includes images that are used by other clinicians or other care groups to be able to provide a holistic patient care in that environment, then the system can be considered down. So it isn't just the device that sits there, that the medical device itself, but it's also the all the intermediary technologies that will facilitate the data capture, data transfer, so that it goes into the EMR. So for better, for better patient care. A good example would be in the ORs, where the ORs are integrated. You bring in a lot of different images from a variety of different systems, but if that bringing in those images is disrupted, it's not technically a medical device issue, but if those
Right.
medical devices, if that transmission of data is disrupted or is not happening, then it does impact the operation of the medical device, because and that's where we have to get involved. But that's a gray area still right now, because that's an area that we're still working on with developing what the boundaries are. And what we found it to be is the best solution to that is more of a collaborative process where for example, we created a systems engineering group that deals specifically with that. So the biomedical and the clinical engineering teams really focus on the device work, focus on the devices, the discrete devices, but the systems engineering team maintains and are the same inventory of medical devices, but they do it at the systems level to make sure that the data transfers and the data coming in and going and data going out is there, so that the device can be, so that clinicians can utilize that device in the best possible way.
So you've created a team of system engineers,
Right.
but and then that includes clinical feedback as well.
Because at the end of the day, whatever we do, if it impacts clinical workflows, it's got to be a collaborative process with the clinicians, because we cannot make that determination of what changes to clinical workflows is acceptable and what is not. And that's something that where we have we have to get our clinicians involved. A good example that we have is we have one lab in one of our campuses. We have a system, say, of an anesthesia machine set up. An anesthesia machine can be say it's pretty simple because it has a couple of different functions, but when you add things to it, or you want to trial something else new, or you want to change the simple thing is changing the location of the monitors, we have to bring in the anesthesiologist to make sure that they're okay with that, because if you change a simple thing as changing the location of a monitor can have a tremendous impact on their clinical workflow, because if the anesthesiologist has to be turning their head in one direction where their head needs to be turned in the other direction for proper clinical care, they're going to pick that up very quickly. So whatever we do in any kind of configuration changes to medical devices, we do that in conjunction with the clinicians so that it does not impact their workflows negatively.
So let me ask, what are you looking forward to in the future? I mean, one thing we enjoy talking about on this podcast is just innovation and what's coming that we're excited about. So is there anything kind of an emerging technology or trend that you think is really going to benefit clinical technology the most?
I mean, one term that comes up is artificial intelligence, but I think a lot of times artificial intelligence, the term, is overused. What I'm looking at it from artificial intelligence is really the ability to acquire tremendous amounts of data for analysis, and using that data to better provide, to better develop maintenance strategies. And a simple thing is using that kind of data capture and analysis, even simply developing mundane or routine systems such as inventory management. As I mentioned earlier, if you bring a device in, and it's simply, and if it's a specific manufacturer and a specific model, then it should automatically inherit everything that it needs to inherit in order, such as PM frequency, PM procedure, etc., and so that it does not have to be done manually. The other thing would be is going back to predictive maintenance. What I would like to see the data come in is preventative maintenance is still a manual process. We have to go touch the machines, perform certain checks, both safety as well as performance verification checks. But with predictive maintenance, we're seeing that more technology manufacturers are really developing a robust built-in analytics so that they look at the system's health on a regular basis. We would like to I think the emerging technology where I'd like to see technology management go into is to be able to tap into that and catch issues before they happen. If you see a specific variable that is starting to fluctuate or is starting to drift, we want to be able to capture it before it actually fails, so that we can actually schedule maintenance off hours so that it does not impact patient care, or does not lead to a device failure, which could then definitely which will definitely bring downtime involved. But with predictive maintenance, we get the additional ability to be able to catch these things before they fail. But more importantly, there are certain types of preventative maintenance inspections. This goes back to this cost savings or cost optimization question. And that is, when we're doing preventative maintenance, we do a lot of these maintenance strategies are still pretty old, and they require us to actually touch the machines, get the data, and then determine whether if it's within a specific range for us to either pass the inspection or fail the inspection. But if that could happen on its own internally through the internal diagnostics, and that system reports out to us, we can then eliminate a lot of a large number of preventative maintenance inspections because it's happening all the time a lot faster than we can. Because there are some preventative maintenance inspections that do not impact mean time between failure. So what is the point of doing those inspections? And those are really legacy inspections from when systems were a lot more manual and systems were more standalone. But since these devices are all sitting on the network, they do a tremendous amount of self-diagnostics. If we can tap into that and develop algorithms where we can actually look at, seeing, not only predicting when something's going to fail and then be able to remediate it before it fails, but also to be able to reduce the number of PMs that we have on our books.
So, if you could give one key piece of advice to health systems looking to optimize their medical technology strategies, what would it be?
At a high level, don't consider clinical engineering or medical device management as a cost sink. Look at it as an opportunity to as a continued process improvement. Because if you look, people tend to, a lot of times, they look at us as a cost sink. Is that we just there's no revenue associated with what we do, and then when they start talking about, oh well, can we develop uptime or downtime reports that we can then quantify what you do? But even that is not the way to do it. I think that's a struggle that we're looking at right now as a field, is to come up with the appropriate benchmark metrics that will justify what we do and how we do it, and be able to better, develop models around staffing and cost structures. But the main advice is, do not look at us as a cost sink, but rather as an opportunity for continuous process improvement.
Ramana, I would love to hear maybe what just gets you up in the morning and why you love doing this.
To be perfectly honest, myself and a couple of other family members have been also customers in the health system. So it's also what keeps me going, and what really helps me understand is the idea that whatever we do, if it's for the patient, because at one point or another, we will be customers one way or the other. And therefore, whatever we do is also based in our self-interest as well. This is to provide the best possible care. Eventually, technology management should lend itself to developing best possible care strategies as well. So that's what keeps me going, is to consider patient care, because at the end of the day, those are our ultimate customers.
We hope today's discussion has sparked your interest and curiosity in the future of healthcare technology. Remember, the conversation doesn't have to end here. You can engage, learn, and discuss by following Health Data Movers on LinkedIn. Your support makes it possible for us to continue bringing these vital conversations to you. If you're looking for the highest quality technology services in healthcare, or have questions about today's topic, don't hesitate to reach out to us at solutions@healthdatamovers.com. Whether you're part of the healthcare industry or simply passionate about the intersection of technology and health, if you enjoyed this episode, please follow Quick Hits on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, or Amazon Music.